Okay, so we have Kyle Birkland, who's our digital learning developer, or one of them. He's based in New Zealand, as is Elaine and Anush, and they are both e-learning developers for Kineo Asia Pacific. We also have Simon Ray, who's a learning designer with Kineo now, but actually used to work for ASADA and has developed responsive e-learning for ASADA in conjunction with Kineo. So he's going to be able to provide developing responsive e-learning from a client perspective for us later in this webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a question pane where if you want to ask questions, we will answer them throughout the webinar. So just, anything you want to know, just drop it in there. We'll endeavour to answer your questions as we go through. And we'll also give you a chance to ask questions at the end as well. We also have a couple of polls which we're going to launch throughout the webinar. And yeah, like I say, if you have any questions, just let us know and we will answer them as we move through. And just let us know if you have any technical difficulties as well with sound or anything like that, and we will do what we can to fix it. So I'm now going to pass to Anuj, who's going to talk us through a bit of responsive e-learning information. So over to you, Anuj.
Hello everyone, my name is Anuj. I'm an e-learning developer at Kineo Pacific, New Zealand. So we'll start with a webinar today, and the things we are going to cover is the responsive e-learning. When we talk about responsiveness, the first thing comes to our mind is flexibility in viewing the content in our smartphones or our desktops or laptops. But responsive is a bit more than that. So along with adjusting our screens on our devices, it is more of seeing how the content is being displayed in a right format. It's not always the fluid layout. It's always the right way it is being shown. Like we can take an example of anything you view on a website. It would be good to have an alternate layout on a mobile device if it doesn't suit properly. So we'll talk about more on this in the next slides. We'll be covering a couple of things like do we really need the e-learning courses to be responsive, or is it just a term used for the websites or web apps, and how the user experience is going to affect the e-learning courses. Also, we'll have a look around a case study for ASADA, and we'll see a practical showcase of what's possible in ADAPT. So basically, new components and new extensions and new features which are still in beta but will be released shortly. So let's start with it. We'll start with a poll initially. So are you developing responsive e-learning? Victoria, can you show the poll?
Yeah, so there's a good little mix there of people attending today. Quite a lot of people thinking about developing responsive, so hopefully this webinar will be very helpful to you guys. So yeah, so Neej, let's talk about responsive. Sorry, I'll just close this poll for you. There you go. Oh.
Okay. So back to responsive e-learning. So what I talked about, like how the content is being displayed, how we are showing the alternate layouts. So we'll see what basically responsive e-learning is. When we talk about displaying our e-learning courses onto devices, it's more about viewing it, and it's more about how the content is being created. So the learning should be delivered from one source to multiple devices so that we do not have content loss. The content should be available on every device. And moreover, we do not run into issues with multiple iterations of updation in the content for different layouts or different devices. The other thing we see is how the content molds itself on different devices so that the content is viewable in different layouts. It's in terms of showing the content as well as rearranging the content into an alternate view. So the alternate view could be a layered structure or an altogether different view. In all, why does responsive e-learning matters? It matters because in the current trend, mobiles are getting way popular than desktops or laptops. They are outnumbering how people use or interact with web applications or internet-enabled websites. The same should be applicable for the learning content. We should not be restricted to an environment where we can log in and go and see the e-learning courses or e-learning content. It should be flexible enough for us to view the content pretty much from anywhere, from where we have access to internet, from where we have access to handheld devices like smartphones and tablets. The content should be available at the point of need, not to a restricted environment or at the time of interest. So let's say I'm traveling or I'm on a vacation, but I still want to access some e-learning course. I should have access to that particular module or that particular content at that right amount of time. It should not be restricted. Changing the trends for electronic devices. My content should be available for smartphones and tablets, apart from laptops and desktops. The way operating systems and different devices are being launched every week or every month. You can see pretty much every month a new device is being launched. So Samsung, Apple, and other mobile providers are launching their own devices now and then, and this makes the life difficult to update the content, be it a website or a web app or the e-learning content. It's applicable to everyone. Specifically with e-learning, it's not easy to deploy the courses if we do any certain amount of change in the modules. So it should be flexible enough. It should be flexible enough for different devices which are coming in the market in the near future, so that they are flexible enough so the content can be viewed properly. And the trend of bring your own device, with the learning content also, we are not restricting the users to access their machines at the office or their machines at the home, but we are inviting users to bring their own device, use their own device, smartphones, tablets, phablets, to access the e-learning course. So it should be flexible enough for them to view the content properly and should be supported. With the new devices coming into the market, the configuration pretty much remains same apart from the screen size. So being a responsive learning means they're still compatible with with those devices. In case there are certain issues, surely we can do fixes. That's what we used to do with other courses previously. But if it is responsive, more or less, it will be compatible with that particular device. Next, we can see, do we really have a need for our e-learning to be responsive, or is it just a trend that we are following? We are not following other people. Like if somebody is doing e-learning responsive, or if somebody is doing a web page responsive, we should convert our e-learning to be responsive. I've created a set of questions. So if answer to some of those questions is yes for you, then surely you will need to have e-learning to be responsive for your organization or for your learners. The first one we can talk about is, do you want to support the multi-device user? If you are creating an e-learning course or a web app only for laptops, then there is no case you should be moving towards the responsiveness of the thing. But if you are targeting users to be able to access the content from smartphones, tablets, phablets, and pretty much all other devices, then surely we should be going towards a responsive trend. If you want the code base to be at a single place, like one code is replicated everywhere. So if you do a change at one place that reflects on all the devices, it's not like we are creating multiple options for different devices. We are not creating one course for a mobile phone. We are not creating another course for a tablet. We are not creating another course for a laptop. This is one code. This is one course, same content, but with a different view. One view could be adjusting that layout. The other view could be an alternative layout for that particular device. But it's one single code base. We do want future scalability. So if you want future scalability in terms of new devices, then surely we do need to have responsive nature in our e-learning in today's time. The last one is very interesting, that do we need learner engagement? Whenever we create e-learning content, the main focus is the learner who is going to use that particular piece of content. So if the content is not getting delivered properly to the learner, then it doesn't make sense to have that e-learning module present in the first instance. So by making it responsive, we are giving a learner an option to access that content 24/7, no matter where the learner is, no matter which device he is using. I'm talking mostly about mobiles, tablets, and laptops. So as long as they are connected to internet, as long as they are not behind a firewall, I mean the e-learning module is not behind a firewall, they should have access to that particular e-learning module. In our general life, when we wake up in the morning, we access our mobile phones to access emails. When we are traveling back home after work, or we are traveling from home to work in the morning, pretty much we have access to mobile phones and mobile data. So there are chances that you start an e-learning course in the office last night, and you want to utilize the time while you're traveling, completing that course. You have access to all of the content, so that makes a real good scenario for responsive learning to be in the practical use, that you can pretty much access all of the content and you can utilize that particular time. We can see how millions of people are relying on smartphones and tablets to access internet, and it is our responsibility as an e-learning professional to be able to deliver the content properly to all the learners. The graph over here, which is shown on the screen, has been picked from Global Stats. So it is showing a trend from 2009 till 2016 October. See how the usage of desktops. So in terms of desktop, it's the laptops as well as the desktop machines we use in the workplace. How it's going down, how the trend is going down, and how smartphones and mobile phones are picking up, like more and more users are using mobile tablets to access internet and access web applications, which includes e-learning content. So in the near future, so let's say we take an example of 2020 or 2018 or 2019, surely that graph is going to peak up further high and will be way beyond the usage of desktop devices. So we should surely be thinking, if not till now, we should surely be thinking about moving towards responsiveness of the e-learning content. Now we can have a poll which discuss about which devices are your learners predominantly using to complete e-learning.
So I guess those results kind of show that it's, well, predominantly desktop at the moment, but there's obviously an increase in users using a mixture of device types, which I think is actually a larger share of the vote than I've previously seen, actually. So it's obviously on the rise that users are switching between all three devices.
Okay.
So I'll just,
So
so just before we move on, I have a question. Anuj, I think this will be for you. And this is from John Umina at, I think it's Ozpost. Has the boat really left for responsive? Does adaptive development have any place?
sorry, Victoria, can you repeat the question, please?
Has the boat really left for responsive design? Does adaptive have any place? So that might be for you or Kyle, maybe, to respond.
I think it's fair to say that how responsive the content needs to be is it's the kind of thing where you can't say every type of device that your audience is going to access it on. Many of our clients, which we'll cover later, have had users coming from out in the field environments or maybe universities, and they might be accessing the content strictly via phone. And then you have other people that may be sitting at a desktop or on a laptop or on their tablet device. And so I think that you can't really say that you're restricting the content or optimizing the content just for desktop environments. When it comes to learning, we really need to be able to branch it out to everyone, all the learners. Does that answer your question, John?
Sorry, I was on mute then. Just bear with me a second, I will check. Partly, I think I mean that the slide-based approach on mobile devices, does this still have a place?
So I
Elaine?
suppose, yeah.
Yes, sorry, I'm still having a think.
Well, I think that's a good question to lead us up into the user experience, actually, John, because it may have a place in sort of traditional environments, but there's no reason why we can't make our learning dynamic and as interactive as possible and stray away from some of these, older styles that worked great for desktop, but but weren't necessarily as good for mobile. And in that endeavor, we're actually introducing better content for desktop as well. It's more interactive. It's visually just different. And I think different is eye-catching. And what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day with learning is retention. People tend to retain the information if it's something that they haven't seen before.
And also the websites, people are familiar with how the websites operate. Like if we take an example of a social media website, they know how to operate it. So we do not need to teach them certain things which are quite obvious, how to scroll and browse through the web page. So we are making those things generic and those things available with Adapt, so that people get familiar with it in the first instance, and with little or with no or very little knowledge, they should be able to adapt the responsive nature of the framework and start building the e-learning courses with Adapt.
Fab.
Cool.
Cool. Let's move on to user experience. Elaine, this is your specialty.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, so I think a good place to start is actually what is UX, because I think a lot of us don't necessarily know, or some of us maybe are not sure if we have the right definition in our heads. So if you're kind of stuck on what UX is, there's a good reason for that. There is no commonly accepted definition for UX. However, the most popular explanations involve the idea that UX, or user experience design, is a user-centered concept. So UX branches across many different disciplines, some of which are interaction design, information architecture, visual design, usability, and human-computer interaction. So in short, UX isn't just a cool word that we use to sound trendy and like we know what we're talking about. It's an approach to graphic design which puts the user or learner first. So it's all about you. Next slide, please. Thanks, Anish. User experience in everyday life. So you can actually find examples of good and bad UX in everyday life. In the example we have here, your kitchen. So if you think about the way that a classic stove has been created, you have the dials along the top, and the eyes are in for, as you can see in the image. Well, quickly, this became confusing for people, and stove makers had to start creating these diagrams below the dials, just to show you which dial goes with which item. Now, if user experience were applied in something industrial design like this, then you'd actually probably arrange the dials in the same sort of pattern as the stovetop. And then there's no question for which dial goes with which stove. And essentially that's what UX is. It's making something so intuitive that you don't require further explanation for how to use it. When it comes to devices like phones, laptops, etc., how we use them and what we find intuitive varies in accordance with the device. So when we're considering UX, and especially in e-learning, because that's what we're all here for, in conclusion, UX is about creating ease of interaction between the learner and the product, as well as the content. UX in e-learning also has the requirement of retention of information, like we were talking about earlier. As designers of e-learning, we should strive to provide the most direct access to our material that we can. But why would we limit ourselves to the notion of a learner just being able to access the material across multiple devices? If we can make it an enjoyable experience with dynamic and innovative methods, then why settle for less? The sky's the limit. And we are pushing the limit of beautiful interactions with Adapt. Later, you'll get to see a sneak peek of some of the, as Anush mentioned, some of the Adapt components we're currently developing They're obviously in beta, so you're getting a little bit of insider information here, but they're pretty exciting, and we can't wait to share them. Next, I'll move on to Kyle. All right.
Hello.
Oh.
I will be talking about things to think about when developing an adapt.
Sorry, I didn't even ask. Was there any questions for me about UX? Sorry, Kyle.
That's all right.
Nope, we can move on to the next section.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so first off, just defining what responsive design actually is. So when developing an adapt, we need to consider responsive design, obviously. To define responsive design, it is an approach to web page creation that makes use of a flexible layout. The goal of responsive design is to build web pages that detect the user's screen size and orientation and change the layout accordingly. Although adapt utilizes a flexible mix of components that can be combined seamlessly to provide a fantastic learning experience, the fluid layout produces intuitive scrolling pages that work beautifully on all devices. We still need to consider responsive design when we are developing an adapt, though, especially if we're creating anything that is not standard or out of the box. Which leads me to compatibility with multiple browsers. Cross-browser testing is the process of reviewing and comparing website functionality and styles across multiple browser platforms, operating systems, and mobile devices to uncover any potential issues we may have. We need to consider what the client needs in terms of tech specs. This could be anything from old browsers such as IE8 to Android phones, Samsung tablets using different browsers such as Mozilla, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari, Edge, just for example. Once we understand what the client's needs are in terms of tech specs, we can develop the course accordingly. Today, more people are using their mobile phones for online shopping, social networking than ever before. And most companies are designing for mobile. Mobile first requires a new approach to planning, UX design, and development that puts handheld devices at the forefront of both strategy and implementation. The digital landscape has changed, and companies have realized that consumers are now accessing more content on their mobile devices than anywhere else. Let's say, for example, a client wants the content to be heavily video-based. We need to think about if this is actually going to be an issue. If the client is using videos within a course, we need to know roughly how long the learning content is actually going to be and roughly how many videos the client would like to use. We need to know what browsers and devices they would like to use, and we need to think about if loading time is going to be an issue for the users. For a faster load time within the course with a heavily based video e-learning course, the solution could be using an external hosting site such as YouTube, Vimeo, or a client's website, just for a faster loading time for the user. With this in mind, we also need to create content that can be accessible in order to provide the equal access and equal opportunity to people with diverse abilities. In the case of videos, we would need to provide a transcript for each video for people who cannot see or hear. And also throughout the course, we would need alternative text for images. If alternative text isn't provided for the images, the image information is inaccessible, for example, to people who cannot see, and they use a screen reader that reads aloud the information on the page, which includes the alternative text for the visual image. Another accessibility is a keyboard. Keyboard accessibility is one of the most important aspects of web accessibility. Being able to navigate sequentially through content so that the user encounters information in an order that is consistent with the meaning of the content and can be operated from the keyboard. Now, I'm just going to quickly brush over this point, but be easier to maintain as if there was only one single version of the code. Writing clean code is essential in the developer world. Clean code is a reader-focused development style that produces code that's easy to write, read, and maintain. Also, writing code that is future-proof is essential. Let's say the client sends me a request several months later after deployment of a course. The client wants me to remove or add a component or two. If I remove this component or add this component, will it break my entire course? Will the entire layout change and look odd? Then let's say the client's branding has also changed from green buttons to blue buttons. And let's say there's 100 buttons in the whole course. Can I make this change with just one line of code and have the new branding colors applied throughout the entire theme? Or would I have to go through the entire code base and change each individual line of code, so each individual line of code just to make each button blue? It's a bit unnecessary. This is why it is important to write clean code so any developer can access the code, read it easily, and make the changes simply without breaking anything. These are a couple of things you need to consider when developing in Adapt. I will be handing over to Simon Ray, who will be showing us a showcase from ASADA. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Kyle. I don't know, were there any questions, Victoria, for Kyle? Or no? I'll just get straight on with it then. So yeah, hi everyone, my name's Simon. I used to work for the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Authority here in Australia. The education section there, that's where I was based, doing all of the e-learning development, which included deploying courses, writing and developing those courses, managing the learning management system, doing video production and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a pretty exciting place to be working. And one of the great joys of working in that environment was actually doing some work with Kineo, whom I'm now employed by down here in Melbourne. But I'm going to be talking about more of my relationship with Kineo from the ASADA point of view. So I might refer to ASADA as we for a little while here. It's just a little bit easier for me. So what ASADA had in place when I joined ASADA was an e-learning ecosystem that was based in Flash. It had already been developed by the previous team that we ended up replacing. That system went into place in 2010, so this is just a little bit of a potted history to give you a sense of why we moved in the direction that we did. Because it was based in Flash, obviously it could not be accessed by anyone using an iDevice, so iPhone or iPad. And just to give you a bit of a history lesson here, very quickly, in 2010 the iPad was launched. I think it was around about 2010. So iDevices were certainly very prevalent in society at that point. So not having e-learning accessible on those devices was proving us to be a little bit of an issue. We were getting lots of anecdotal evidence to say that athletes around the world were trying to access our e-learning on those devices, and it just wasn't working. So fast forward to 2014. The World Anti-Doping Agency was about to launch the 2015 Anti-Doping Code, so we had an opportunity to change our programs, change our learning management system, the e-learning and that kind of space. So we approached, did the usual government thing and went out to tender and formed a relationship with Kineo, and we worked with them to develop some e-learning, and we went with responsive designed e-learning built in Adapt. And the reason we did that is right there in front of you on that in that image there. I challenge you to find every single mobile phone in that photo. This is from the closing ceremony of the London Games. so the London Olympic Games. Every single athlete there is holding up their phones, taking photos, shooting video. Athletes generally are very busy people. Now, this can be athletes who are at this level, at the Olympic level. This could be athletes who are playing Saturday morning footy down at the local oval. This could be athletes, trying to make, national teams, state level teams. Most athletes are pretty busy people, and they want to access the information that they need when they need it in the way that they want it. And mobile devices are generally the way that they do that. This was the information that we were getting through pretty loud and clear from national sporting organisations and the athletes themselves when we were talking with them. So that refresh of our learning ecosystem had to be responsive. It had to be in a way that these athletes could access. So could we just jump to the next slide, guys? Thank you. So the ASADA requirements for our course was definitely multi-platform. Our learners are pure BYOD, so they all bring their own device, and ASADA had absolutely no control whatsoever as to what device, what platform, what operating system these people were using. Now, if you think about an athlete, we're not just talking elite athletes. Like I said earlier, we're talking about your Saturday warriors. We're talking about lawn bowlers who are any age from our Commonwealth Games athletes, who are, a lot of them are quite young, right through to your 70 and 80-year-olds. They were also being required to come on board and do our courses as well. So very varied level of computer literacy, very varied levels of computer builds, platforms, and that kind of stuff. So we were having people accessing our courses on Windows 98, even as recent as a couple of years ago. So very, very broad. Responsive design, it had to go on iPhones, it had to go on Samsung tablets, it had to go up to iPad Pros and down to your small iPhone 4s and that kind of stuff. We also wanted something that was going to tap into that competitive nature of an athlete. An athlete is an athlete because they are competitive people. Games, they want to play games. Now, we didn't want to go down the path of gamification for the sake of having a gamified course, but we definitely wanted to tap into elements of gamification. So how could we challenge our athletes to be a little bit competitive with one another in doing our course? So I'll show you how we managed to do that down the track. Can I grab the next slide, please? Now, this is a little screenshot that I did a little while ago. This is actually from the ASADA Level 1 Anti-Doping course. And if my computer guys can just play that little video for me, what you'll actually see is where we cross our fingers and hope it works. Here we go. What you can actually see here is that as the screen gets smaller, the content shifts and moves around to actually fit into that particular screen size. And a little bit further along, you'll see that it actually starts to scroll up and down. And if we go back to John's question earlier about slide-based content on a mobile device, well, the beauty with Adapt is it is not slide-based. It's a scrolling, vertical scrolling e-learning content, so it actually goes up and down the page, and each component will be actually displayed in a slightly different manner depending on the screen size that you've got there. So you might have a component there with text and an image next to it, and when the screen size gets smaller, like you saw then, all you see is the image, and then you click the little plus arrow, the plus icon there, to reveal the text that is now behind that content. So the smaller screen size, the content doesn't get lost, it just gets shifted around, and you then scroll to get to where you need to go. All right, so we're already on the next slide there, so if you guys could just play that one for me. There we go. All right, so this is where we see some of the elements of gamification. Up the top here is what Adapt has called a draw feature, and what you can use that for is to show what all the core content is of that course. You can also use it to jump directly to the mandatory components like we've just seen there. So you can click on the mandatory component, jump to that question point, and then away you go. The other thing it has in there is a dashboard to review your performance. So you can see on this particular screenshot here, there's the numbers of attempted questions, the percentage they've got correct, and here's where we get the gamification aspect to it, the length of the overall assessment. So we worked with Kineo quite hard this was the point where we wanted to really challenge our athletes. They could have had an assessment at the end of the course that ran anywhere from 8 questions to 36 questions. Now they could go through the course and just ignore all the questions, get them all wrong, and get through it really quickly, because we didn't really lock it down that much. But at the end of it, they would have to do 36 questions to prove that they understood the content. However, if they actually paid attention, answered the questions correctly, they would have a much lower number of questions at the end. So in this case, they're getting a pretty good percentage right, so they're only going to get 8 questions at the end. A little bit further down the page, you can see that there is a silver medal, and they were awarded either a gold, silver or bronze medal or a certificate of participation, depending on how they went. And a little bit further down the page, again, was just a little bit of information about each of the learning outcomes. And we're just going back through it again. So each learning outcome had a number of questions associated with it. Here we go. You could see that how many they got correct. If there was any incorrect ones there, it would also show you that they got those incorrect, and then a number of questions that they would receive at the end of that course based on the number of incorrect answers they may have got for each of those learning outcomes. If we just keep scrolling through there. I'm not seeing that move there, so I don't know if we've moved on. That's all right. Just move on to the next slide, guys, if we can. Okay, so we'll just keep going. One of the great things about this course was that when we got some of the feedback from the athletes themselves and the national sporting organisations. Now, when I'm talking national sporting organisations, I'm talking about people like Swimming Australia, the Australian Olympic Committee, the Paralympic Committee, Rowing Australia, those kinds of groups of people. The previous course was not mandatory for a lot of these organisations. They weren't going to put their athletes through it. There was a bit of a negative stigma in regards to that. This was because the course was a cartoony type character. It was built in Flash. It was not accessible on iDevices and all that kind of stuff. There was lots of reasons around it. It was an award-winning course at the time, but it did date quite quickly. What happened when we launched this course was that national sporting organisations started to actually make this mandatory prior to national team selections, before taking the court, so the Australian Diamonds, the Australian netball team. Those girls weren't allowed to actually take the court even in training camp without actually having completed this course. So national sporting organisations came on board and really pushed this out to their athletes and made it a requirement, which was really excellent. The other thing that athletes were coming back to us and saying was that it was a much easier course to understand and get through, so they were actually able to access it on their mobile devices. They were able to access it on tablets and computers when they needed to, and that the content wasn't any different the way it was delivered. But the other really good thing, a couple of times when I was out speaking with athletes, that we did find that athletes were asking each other how did you go in that ASADA course? How many questions did you have at the end? So that challenge of getting as many right through as possible through the course really, really had a good effect, and it was exactly what we were looking for there. So what we saw, the result of actually launching this at the end of 2014, so just after Christmas we launched this, we had significant numbers of completion rates, an increase in completion rates. So we were sitting at around about 200 or 300 completions per month prior to the launch of this course, and that went through the roof to around about 800 completions per month, which was a dramatic increase. We also had a dramatic reduction in emails and phone calls regarding the e-learning not working. So we were getting 10 to 15 calls per day, a number of equivalent emails per day. That went through the floor to sometimes we might get 3 or 4 a week, maybe if we were really lucky. As I said earlier, national sporting organisations started to make the course mandatory for all athletes, which was an excellent win for us. It was also purchased by Drug Free Sport New Zealand and then modified for their own athletes to make it, New Zealand centric, using their own athletes, their own colour schemes, their own information. So we did have also inquiries from some European national anti-doping organisations to potentially purchase it as well. So. And it won awards. We in conjunction with Kineo, pulled out a Platinum eLearning LearnX Award, which was fantastic. And we also most recently won an award over in England. Victoria, you'd need to remind me as to what that one was called. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it's been a very successful program for ASADA and for Kineo themselves. So. Are there any questions that don't relate to anti-doping but to adapt development?
Yeah, so we have a question from Brendan Allardyce, and he said, have you ever found yourself on the horns of a dilemma when it comes to responsive learning?
Yes, Brendan, hello, how are you, mate? Yes, horns of a dilemma has been, we've been in there a few times, and one of the greatest horns of a dilemma was, could we actually code ourselves in ADAPT? And I'm happy to say that yes, we went out and we learnt how to do the ADAPT development ourselves. So it is certainly something that can be done within your own agencies, as well as getting the excellent team here at Kineo to do it for you. Thanks for the question, BA.
We also have another question from John at Auspost again. And he said, what were the challenges of getting your e-learning to function on Bring Your Own Device? And did you create your own e-learning development standards, user experience, ID standards, or did Kineo develop these for you?
We actually worked pretty closely with Kineo to help develop those. So Kineo's expertise in cross-platform testing is excellent. So we worked really closely with people like Anuj and the other developers to make sure that we had a really good understanding as to what platforms were being used by our athletes. So we did a lot of research into what they were getting, so looked at the analytics off of our website and our previous actual learning management system, and then we made sure that we were covering as large a percentage as possible at that time to make sure that they were all getting good access and the display was good. Nothing would be out of reach for too many people. I did mention the Paralympic Committee earlier, so making sure that all of our accessibility was in place as far as we could possibly do it. And Australian government, as you probably know, John, working for Australia Post, we have to make sure that WCAG 2.0 AA standards are maintained. So we had to go through that whole process of making sure there was alt text, any video had its captions enabled, or there was alternative ways of actually getting that information across, keyboard accessibility and all of that kind of stuff. So we did send the course out to test with some of the Paralympic Athletics Australia athletes, and we got some really good feedback and useful ways to redevelop and make sure that stuff was available for them as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep, just one more question for you, Simon. Did you have to cut out much content, which made sense if the course which would make sense if the course was desktop only, but was it too much for mobile?
No, we had a lot of content already existing and we ended up adding to it. So it wasn't so much a case of reducing the content. What we had to do was word it very carefully so that it didn't get too verbose and be too legalese in a lot of cases, because the language was really important. The level of literacy across athletes is quite varied, so we had to make sure that the level of literacy ability of our athletes was met. But what we were able to do is that the course itself was made up of 8 modules, including the final assessment. So where we found that we needed to add content into it, it was a case of, does this go into a new menu item? Does it? Do we just keep scrolling down the page a little bit further, add a few more components, that kind of stuff? So to actually not having to worry about or too much about fitting in one slide position was actually really quite liberating in some respects.
Awesome. One more for you, and then we will move on. How easy do you feel the development of ADAPT courses was compared to developing another tool?
Is that personally or with Kineo as the development agency? I'll answer both very quickly. With working with Kineo from ASADA was a really good process. So from the ASADA point of view, we had numerous meetings. We had content design meetings, we had look and feel meetings. We made sure that we were really clear about what we needed to be delivered, and likewise Kineo coming back the other way were really clear about what it is that they were going to be giving back to us. When storyboards came back to us, it was really clear as to what we were supposed to do. Any editing processes, it was a really simple and straightforward process, and there was at no point really any confusion as to what needed to be done and when it needed to be done by, so that we could meet our deadlines. If we were going to go beyond that, that was also pretty clearly communicated as well. From a personal point of view, I decided that I needed to learn how to code in ADAPT, and that really is, that was a great experience for me. I had to learn code. So I had to go out and learn HTML5, cascading style sheets. I didn't get into the Java scripting, but that would also help down the track. So there's a lot of good resources out there to help people learn how to code and get the ADAPT tool up and running. Once you get it up and running and you're into it, it's a really interesting way to develop e-learning. So hope that answered.
Great, thanks for that, Simon. So speaking of development, let's move on to Kyle, who's going to showcase some of the latest technology and latest possibilities that you have in ADAPT. Are you there, Kyle?
Yeah, just I'm swapping chairs. Awesome. Okay. let's get straight into a live demo, shall we? Cool. Okay, so here I'm just going to showcase a little something that we've been working on in our off time. Just a little sneak peek at what's possible in Adapt. I'll show a couple of components first. Awesome, so first we've got a component called the background scroll, and what this component does is it changes backgrounds as you scroll through the course while having a component overlaid on top. You can have multiple components laid over top, and the background changes accordingly as you scroll with a simple fade. So that one's already open source, already out there for everyone to grab and play with. But stuff that is, needs more testing and is in beta is this component. It's called a blinds component, which when you hover over one of these rectangles, or click on one of these rectangles, you'll have text that can pop up, and you can fully customize this to your liking. It's just a nice fluid movement through each of the blocks, which is fairly new in Adapt. It's really smooth. I love this one. I can't wait till it's ready for release. But obviously it still needs testing. Next, we have a thing called a question strip component. This is where you need to match up the correct image and submit to see if you're correct or not. So let's go ahead and find the correct matching. For testing purposes, I put a big fat correct over the correct image so I can get it correct. Submit. And it comes up with a feedback box. Next up, we have something a little bit fun. It's called a sliding puzzle. So you can put any image here, and it's just like any normal puzzle that you'll do in real life. You click on the pieces to move them around, and you just got to match it up into, well, in this case, it's just a card. But I'm not going to go through and do this because I find it difficult myself. So, continue. Ooh. We have an exposed component. So we have 3 hot boxes, and just ignore that image underneath. It's still in testing, reminding everyone. But here we've got these overlays of option 1, 2, 3. You can click on each one, and it reveals text or text and graphic component inside of this. Cool, so that's enough of the components. I'll bring it to the audio components. Unfortunately, no one will be able to hear the audio play, obviously, but I thought I'd just show this to you because it's been quite a large request from clients to have audio within some of these components. The one on the screen at the moment is a hot graphic audio component. So on click of, wow, that was loud coming through our end. Once you click on a pin, the sound plays. This could be any sound you like. Could be some narration over an image or anything you can think of. We can do it. Next up, we have the narrative audio. Same deal. It's got a play and pause button, which can be fully customized. We can add a stop button too. essentially the same story as the hot graphic audio, but within a narrative component. Lastly, we have a multiple choice question where if you choose correct or false, you can choose what kind of sound you want the user feedback to be. I'm not sure if you'll hear this, but yeah, so adding audio to components is quite in high demand at the moment, which is awesome. Lastly, I'll just show a couple of extensions that we've been working on. Background videos on blocks. So we can have any type of component overlaying these videos. Yeah, and we've got the full screen video as well, which is on a block also. As well, we can have components overlaying this, any component that you like, which is awesome. And lastly, we have a lightbox extension, which is pretty much a component inception. So we have a text and graphic that we have here. And once you click on the lightbox, it pops up with a lightbox, and I've put an MCQ component inside of this. So we'll go ahead and answer it, and then that can show feedback as well. So it's basically having two components inside of one, which obviously can be very flexible, which is perfect for us. And yeah, that is it for what's possible and what's new and what's to come in Adapt. And obviously there's a lot more, but I only wanted to give you a sneak peek of what I felt like sharing. Feel free to ask any questions.
Kyle, so I've just got a couple of questions that have came through kind of during the webinar as well. One of the questions is, what language do you code in for Adapt?
So we code in CSS, less, and JSON. We use a JSON structure. We also use JavaScript as well.
For this particular question, we can divide into two segments actually. One is if you're styling or theming the components or the adapt course. So primarily for that one, we're using less and JSON to structure the content. And if you think about creating or extending or editing any component or extension, the syntax is primarily using jQuery, but the backbone of Adapt is using the backbone library. So if you're familiar with backbone, if you're familiar with handling how to structure the HTML into handlebar templates, and you're comfortable with using jQuery, you are pretty much good to start developing new components or extensions.
Sorry, I'm just going through the questions and making sure we've answered them all. How does alt text work on mobile? I'm not sure who that would be the best to answer that.
For the alt text, basically it is used for the accessibility purpose. So if a user is using the screen reader, so that particular text will be read out to the user using the tool. So let's say if you're using JAWS or any of the screen reader, that reader will read out that particular text for a particular graphic or for a particular component. The structure of Adapt is laid out in such a way that certain things like responsive nature and accessibility with AA standards comes out of the box. The only thing you need to do is lay out your content properly into the JSON files. So if you're using a screen reader, you navigate between the codes. It will explain about what this component is about, which is built-in adapt. You can of course change the content, but if you decide to go with the default content for the definition of the component, it is inbuilt. And after that, you can navigate between a component, and it will navigate between the buttons and the title and the description of the component, which is pretty much inbuilt in Adapt. You don't have to do anything in terms of code. The only thing you need to do is place the right amount of and the right text at the right place in the JSON structure.
Great, thank you, Anish. Okay, so I think we've obviously run slightly over time. There's a couple of questions that have come through that we may need to just follow up on in terms of sending out a little bit more information with regards to the Adapt plugins that we've demonstrated today. So Kyle, do you want to just flick through to the last slide in the presentation, and I'll just go through a little bit of info about so here's obviously a bit of a summary as to what we've presented about today. We will be sending the recording and the slides out early this afternoon, or at least today for you New Zealanders who might be on the line. It will probably be later this afternoon for you guys. But yeah, if you just flick through to the last slide. So obviously there's a lot more information about Adapt out there on the Adapt community, on the Adapt website, and obviously you can always contact us if you want to get more examples of e-learning that's been developed in Adapt. You can ask to view our showcase to get some more ideas about how you can use it, and we'll gladly set you up with that. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, everyone. And those questions that we haven't answered yet, we will be sending out further information this week. So we will come back to you on those questions. But yeah, is any and I don't know, Kyle, have you got anything, or Elaine or Anuj, anything to just wrap up with very quickly?
In the end, we can just say it's open source, so you can pretty much log into GitHub, and if you're good to go with JavaScript, or you're good to go with creating themes, just start contributing. And last but not the least, it does support i8.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Like I say, we'll send out the recording and the slides a bit later today. And in the meantime, let us know if you've got any more questions, and we will come back to you on those questions that have come through in the last few minutes. I'm very conscious of time, so thank you for joining us, and we will hopefully speak to you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.